So, I've been playing the new Final Fantasy VII Remake recently, like I'm sure a lot of you have been as well. And while it's not perfect and definitely has its flaws, overall, I'm having a really good time with it. With that said, I'm not too crazy about what they've done with Cloud's personality, as he acts even more distant than before, and honestly, he seems more like Squall than the original Cloud. It sort of had me reflecting on the protagonists from the series as a whole, so I thought it'd be fun to go back and do a top 10 list on my personal favorites. I'm just gonna keep it to mainline games though. If I started including spin offs, it'd get a little confusing because then it'd be like, okay, am I talking about Yuna from her own game where she's a protagonist? Or am I talking about her from the original Final Fantasy X? Stuff like that. So yeah, just gonna keep it to the main number games to make it simple, which kinda sucks because I do like Ramza a lot, but some sacrifices have to be made for the greater cause, I guess. Anyway, I think that's enough rambling, so let's get this top 10 list started. In last place on the list, and probably to no one's surprise, we have Vaughn from Final Fantasy XII. Honestly, I could put one of the generic heroes from the first few games here instead, but despite how much he sucks, he's at least more fleshed out than some 8-bit sprites, I guess. As a lot of you already know, I'm sure, Bosch was originally supposed to be the main character of Final Fantasy XII, but apparently the Japanese fan base didn't want some old grizzly dude, and instead wanted your stereotypical cheery-eyed teenager, which is super popular in a lot of games and anime out there. This is a shame because it would have been a nice, refreshing change of pace to break the JRPG mold and get an older, mature hero, which we don't often get in the genre. Because of this, despite being the avatar that you control, Vaughn feels like an afterthought and carries very little importance to the overall story. I mean seriously, just change a few scenes around and you could pretty much tell the entire story of Final Fantasy XII without having Vaughn there at all. And that's pretty much why Vaughn ranks last in this list. Let's move on. In number 9, we have Bartz from Final Fantasy V. Bartz is an easygoing adventurer who simply just wants to explore the world on his late father's behalf until he gets tied up in a typical save the world plot. His friendly and laid-back attitude go well with the lighthearted tone of the game, which makes him a pretty likable protagonist all in all. He does get serious when he needs to though, especially as his responsibility grows, but throughout it all, he always remains calm and collected. Because Final Fantasy V has less focus on the story than 4 and 6, and instead focuses more on gameplay, there's honestly just not a lot to say about him. I mean, I like him from what's there, there's just unfortunately not a lot to work with in comparison to the other main characters from the series. And that's basically why he ranks pretty low on this list. So with that said, let's go to the number 8 spot. Okay, in number 8 on our list, we have Lightning from Final Fantasy XIII. To me personally, Lightning is just okay. Aside from the fact that she's a female protagonist, which is extremely rare for not only the Final Fantasy series, but JRPGs as a genre, in my opinion, she's just not too memorable really. I mean, she's just really cold and distant.
Don't touch anything!
In the game, and you don't really have any context yet, so you're kinda just like, okay, why is this lady so mad all the time? Shit, I don't know. You do find out her backstory later and why she acts the way she does, but still, that doesn't really make her any more enjoyable to follow around, you know? Like, a tragic past is cool and all, but that doesn't make a good character alone. I don't think she's a bad character, and I don't hate her like some people do. She's just not my favorite personally. I will say that Final Fantasy XIII, being one of my least favorite in the whole series, probably isn't doing her any favors, but it is what it is though. Anyway, let's move on. Coming in at number 7, we have Noctis from Final Fantasy XV. Noctis is kind of similar to Lightning to me in the sense that he's just not super memorable, and I think a lot of this stems from the fact that the story in Final Fantasy XV just isn't that well told.
Right.
I'm not gonna say it's not a good story, it's just not well told.
Right.
Because of this, his character development feels rushed, and some emotional moments later on don't feel earned because we don't know enough about him or the other characters to really care that much.
What now?
It's too bad because there are some interesting elements in the story, and I do like Noctis as a character. I mean, yeah, he's another quiet type, but he's not as standoffish as Squall or Lightning is. If he was fleshed out more, he would probably rank higher on this list, but I just gotta go with what the game gives us. I'm just talking about the baseline game, as I played the game at launch and haven't really played any of the new DLC they've released over time to kind of fix some of the story, and I haven't played any of the spin-offs either, so anyway, let's go to the number 6 spot. In number 6, we have Squall from Final Fantasy VIII. Now, a lot of what I said about Lightning earlier could be applied to Squall as well, and it could even be argued that she has more justifiable reason to act the way that she does. So you're probably asking, why does he rank here? The answer, my friends, is a combination of nostalgia and that fucking gunblade. I mean, let's be honest here, the gunblade is a pretty cool ass weapon, especially if you were introduced to it as a kid like I was. It's like the developers were thinking, okay, we used both swords and guns in the 7th installment. What can we do this time? I got it. Combine them both. Peanut butter and jelly that shit. It ended up being a good combo, you know? Speaking of the 7th game, I like how they gave Cloud some armor on his shoulders, but when it came to a guy from an actual military academy in this one, they gave him fuzzy feathers on a black leather jacket. Makes total sense, right? I know a lot of people hate Squall because he's your stereotypical edgelord emo kid, but to be fair, that was pretty cool in the 90s. More people probably hate him though for being kind of a jerk and a loner for most of the game, which I get. He's definitely not for everyone, but he did come out on a PlayStation game, which in my opinion is peak Final Fantasy, so he's hard to forget in that sense. Anyway, that's enough about Squall, so let's move on. Coming in at number 5 on our list, we have Terra from Final Fantasy VI. I know a lot of you are probably thinking, wait, Final Fantasy VI doesn't have a main character. And yeah, you're technically right, but Terra's probably the closest thing we get to one. She is the character representation in the Dissidia games, and she just carries a lot of importance to the overall story. Plus, she is the first character you take control of in the game, so that's pretty important as well. I know a lot of people argue that either Locke or Celeste could be the main character as well, due to their roles in the first and second half of the story, and I get where you're coming from, but just for this list, I'm going with Terra. Sorry. Anyway, Terra's cool because she's an Esper, which makes her magically inclined and quite powerful, and she also goes through a lot of character development throughout the game. She starts off kinda confused and fearful, but grows a lot of determination and even shows some motherly instincts later in the game. She ends up being a really strong character, both mentally and physically, which is what makes her so awesome. For being their first stab at a female protagonist, Square did a pretty good job here, I think. Anyway, that's enough about Terra, so let's move on to number 4. In number 4 on our list, we have Cecil from Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy IV was the first game in the series to really have the story as a main focus, and it pretty much set the standard for how that would continue to be the case in future installments. The characters were way more fleshed out than they had been in the past, with actual development throughout the game, and there was no greater example of this than Cecil himself. Not only does his personality undergo massive growth, but he changes his appearance completely to where even the in-game sprites reflect it. This, plus the more serious tone and grander scope of the story, was practically unheard of at the time, which really made Cecil stand out amongst his peers. And whether he was in his Dark Knight form or his Paladin form, he looked pretty fucking cool either way. So yeah, because he's the first protagonist to actually have a character arc, that's why he ranks so high on this list. Let's go on to the number 3 spot. In number 3, we have Tidus from Final Fantasy X. First of all, I know it's officially pronounced Tidus, but I always said Tidus as a kid. It just makes more sense with the water theme of the game, so that's what I'm sticking with. Plus, Tidus just sounds stupid to me and reminds me of tedious, which I guess could be a theme as well for the late game grinding required to beat the Dark Aeons, but whatever, going with Tidus. Now, I know him being this high is a controversial pick because a lot of people hate him due to how whiny and annoying he is. But I think it actually fits his character within the context of the story. In his former life, he was a super successful athlete used to a vastly different lifestyle before he was thrust into an unknown environment. So I think how he acts may not always be likable, but it's pretty realistic. People love to hate on him for the infamous laughing scene. And yeah, if you're just hearing it randomly, he sounds stupid as shit, I get it, but people often forget that it actually fits the context of the scene it's in.
You probably shouldn't laugh anymore.
In the scene, Yuna's trying to cheer him up by forcing him to smile and laugh because she thinks it'll help. Meanwhile, Titus thinks it's kind of stupid, so he does this super awkward, forced laugh just to comply with her request. But right after, Yuna gives him shit for sounding fucking stupid, then they both start authentically laughing, which sounds way more natural, obviously. So yeah, the laugh sounds weird because it was supposed to sound weird. Just wanted to point that out. Anyway, that's enough ranting about Titus, so let's go to the number 2 spot. In number 2 on our list, and surely to piss a lot of people off, we have the iconic Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy VII. If you're watching this video, I don't really need to explain to you how beloved and popular Cloud is. For a lot of people, Final Fantasy VII was either their introduction to the series, to JRPGs as a genre, or maybe even to video games as a whole. So for that reason, Cloud will always be a fan favorite. His character design, from his hair to his giant-ass Buster Sword, is absolutely legendary and pretty much set the JRPG trope for the spiky-haired, sword-wielding main hero. At the beginning of the game, Cloud is your typical too-cool-for-school loner, but even in these parts, he still shows a lot more personality than someone like Squall does, for example. Later in the game, though, some serious plot twists happen which really develop his character and his personality. To top it all off, his rivalry with the main antagonist Sephiroth is easily one of the most iconic in all of gaming. Because of all these reasons, that's why Cloud ranks so high on this list. With as much as I like Cloud though, there is someone I like just a bit more. Coming in at the top spot, we have Zidane from Final Fantasy IX. If this list was based purely on outward appearances, Zidane would probably rank pretty low on this list. But it's not about what's on the outside, it's about what's on the inside. And on the inside, he's a pretty cool ass dude. Like, out of all the main characters, if I just had to sit back, chill, and crack open a beer with one of them, it would definitely be Zidane. He's just super laid back and friendly and just seems like he'd be a fun guy to hang out with. It's funny, despite having a tail and sort of looking like a munchkin with some Sean Hunter hair, he's pretty much the most normal out of all the Final Fantasy main characters. For one, he actually acknowledges when women show him interest, unlike characters from previous games acting super oblivious. In addition to that, he actually seems capable of having a normal conversation and friendships with people. He has a happy-go-lucky, carefree attitude, but isn't afraid to get serious when the situation calls for it, and has a strong sense of responsibility to help people, which is reflected in his character quote. He definitely has some flaws though, like his womanizing for example, but he really grows and matures throughout the game. He certainly finishes the game a lot more mature and determined than how he starts it. I guess the biggest reason why I love Zidane so much is that of all the main characters, he probably has the most relatable personality to my own. We do roleplay and role-playing games after all, so it can be cool to play as a character who kinda reminds you of yourself a bit. With all that said, Final Fantasy IX is my favorite in the series, so I'll always have a soft spot for Zidane and all the other characters. Favorite game aside though, all the other reasons I previously mentioned are why Zidane ranks as my favorite Final Fantasy protagonist of all time. And that basically wraps up this list. As always, just wanted to say thank you to everyone who took the time to watch our video. If you would like to follow us on Instagram or support us on Patreon, you can do so at the links below. Whether it's a view, a like, a subscribe, or a donation, we appreciate it all the same. Other than that, till next time, guys.